Okay, so what I'm going to look at today is I've got a couple of sketches in my sketchbook. Let's bring you right into these. So it's a landscape that I've done, and I'd like to scale it up a bit and see how we go with it. So this is my sort of starting point. I'm going to be using watercolour, and I have already drawn it out. So again, let me bring you in to see the drawing. Not masses of detail, but enough to know where everything is going to be. Okay, so I've got this scene here in watercolour, and I'm going to start off with my sky. So the first thing to do is to wet my sky. So I'm using this 30mm flat brush, just taking my time and bringing the water down to my tree line really. I don't mind if I go over the edge of the tree line. But I'm going to come back over it a couple of times just to make sure I don't have any dry spots. Then I'm going to come in with a mixture of ultramarine blue and a peacock blue. Just like the mix of two colours. If you don't have peacock blue, you can use a cobalt or a phthalo. I've got some very strange things happening on my palette here. I've obviously got something on there. Let's see what happens when I paint. So I want to bring this blue colour down about a third to a half of my sky. So I'm bringing it down, then I'm going to wash my brush, just wash this out a little bit to virtually nothing. Then I'm going to pick up some gold and come up the other way. Let's just take that edge out, don't want the edge there. I'm going to pick up a touch more of that gold. Whilst it's all still wet, I just want that to have a slightly stronger colour, and I'm going to add a little bit of raw sienna in there for opacity. That's a big word, isn't it? Fade that up. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for a minute just to settle. A lot of that's going to end up covered over. So I don't mind if that sky is still damp. Just bringing this down to my next line down. Let's just dry brush a bit of edge into that now. It is drying off. See how softly it's going, so that's because the back paper is still damp. My next bit is coming in here with the gold, and I do just want to show you, look Look at that gold swirling around in there. These are all tactics whilst I'm waiting for that hedge line to dry off a bit. So I'm going to pick up my gold. These are all tactics whilst I'm waiting for that hedge line to dry off a bit. So I'm going to pick up my gold, and I want to have gold on the top of my grasses coming through here. And as I do this, I'm going to do a little bit of scratching. And a bit of scratching. I'm going to pick up some of my dirty, very dirty lemon yellow. And we'll come back into this in a little bit. But for now, it's just starting to build the grasses on this bank. Taking a damp brush, smushing it around a little bit. Take that lemon yellow and add it to some of the ultramarine, just to get a slightly darker green, just as we come into the bank here. And again, I'm going to come back and add to this with some more colour and more stuff later. Might tuck that darker down in behind it. We'll worry about that later. It's definitely going to have a darker, sort of more shadowed area along the edge. So let's just, I've just picked up a bit of purple off my palette, just to start that off. So I can come back in with my sky colour, so that's my ultramarine and your brighter blue, so that's either your cobalt, your peacock, your phthalo, whatever you like. To start off with, just a little bit of a wiggle. Keep your brush strokes horizontal, that way your water will look flat. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of silver, and this has got a beautiful little sparkle in it. Very pale at the moment. We can come back in and add more to it, but it's much easier to add than to take away. Now before I do this bit, I need to come forward and do the rocks. Let's start back here. Just bring this landmass forward. So I've got a bit of a grassy knoll coming down there. Keeping it all very soft at the minute. Let's just turn you slightly to this side, there we go. And then again I'm going to pick up a bit of my gold just on the top here. Picking up the lemon yellow. Bit of the ultramarine blue into there as well. So let's add some ultramarine and a little bit of umber just to give me a little bit more dark. So it's just a bit blue, tiny touch of the brown. We'll come back in and build all of this later. Okay, then we start to come forward to these rocks. So this is going to be my gold and my umber. We'll use a little bit of a yellow ochre as well. And I will be adding some blue into this too, just to vary it all. So as we come down to sort of the deeper areas, just seeing the top bit of the rocks. And then as we come back, there's sort of more layers of rocks and sand and mud and stuff. I'm not being too specific. Brown, ochre, gold. So when we need to add a bit more depth to this in a minute, I will add some blues into it as well. So I'm going to leave that to dry and come back to the river itself. So let's just move you back across there a little bit. So I need my blues and a touch of the silver. I'm adding a bit of colour, I'm fading it out with some water. I'm going to go over some of these rocks so they're sort of underwater almost. We'll add some more rocks sticking out, or mud sticking out in a little bit. Apart from the trees coming up here, we've got a grounding of everything. I'm probably not going to touch the sky. I'm quite happy with that, as is. I would quite like to make this row of trees at the back tuck a bit more behind. I've got a light layer which I quite like, but I think I want to tuck in behind that. So I'm going to mix my ultramarine and my gold, which gave me that colour in the first place, with the tiniest bit of the lemon in there. Bit more blue and a touch of brown just to make it darker, and I think I'm going to go over to my smaller brush. This one is a number 4. And I'm just going to come in the back, just tickle away, putting some darker in. I don't want it too dark, but I want it darker than it is at the minute. And you can have a separate brush that's just got, it's just a damp brush, just to fade that up into your greenery. So we can afford to probably be a touch darker still. And I'm just going to take my damp brush, just fade it out. So it's a bit of what I call push and pull, so it's putting a bit in, taking a bit out, softening it down. Putting a bit of shape into those trees. We love a good bit of smushing. Now obviously how much paint you mix up is a very personal thing. Personally, I know what colours I'm using, so I can always mix some more colour, but I quite like not having quite enough. So I keep having to mix it, and each time I mix it, it's just slightly different. So for on landscape paintings, I find that gives me sort of a more natural look rather than a blocked in look. So is that standing out a little bit more back there? Hopefully. Not going to put too much information here because I've got these trees to come over the front and I don't want it to be confusing. But it kind of has to join in with what we've been doing, so just a touch there. Hopefully that makes the bank over here stand out a little bit more. So now we need to start building that up. So what I've done is the shadow colour I've just used, I've added a bit more gold into it, and I'm just layering these grasses. Being careful not to cover the top because that's where my highlight gold is. Scratch it around a bit, we do like a bit of scratching. Sometimes more gold, sometimes more brown, sometimes more blue, all is good. What I'm trying to do is make this not level and even. The temptation is to level it all out because we're brought up to be neat and tidy. Nature is quite scruffy, really. Back here I'm just going to snaffle a little bit, make it a touch greener. Just have a few ripples coming across. just a little darker in on that edge. Pull that out before it dries too much. Okay, so I'm going to continue doing this along the front. Okay, so I've got that bank, quite happy with that. Let's come back this side. There's sort of a little blank bit there, so I'm going to put a bit of colour in it, but not a lot. Again, this is the tree trunk's going to come over that. And when I get to this bit, I'm just going to start adding, instead of just streaks, just a few other plants that might have broader leaves. So do that a little bit closer to it. Again, doing the same technique of a few dots and dashes to create the feeling of leaves rather than just grasses in a few places. Okay, I'll move across a little bit, get more comfy. Right, I'm going to work into the mud here now, so I'm going to use my umber and ultramarine, so blue and brown. didn't want. Just wash that out a little bit. So I'm putting these darker areas in, and then again, like we did earlier on, just sort of washing them out a bit. So this is a little bit paler here because it's under the water. And I'm going to put another layer of water over the top of it once it's dried. Again, picking up gold, brown, blue. It's quite a limited palette I'm using here. We're just trying to make sort of rough rock shapes to start off with. We can refine this later. Make this a bit more muddy than rocky. So we just do sort of a texture here. I'm going to do a darker layer of this texture in a minute. Coming back up to my next size up brush. It's a bit more of this blue and brown mix. And then I'm going to do a bit of dry brushing. Quite difficult at this angle, but we'll get there. So what I want to create is like some little footprint puddles on the edge here. So back to my smaller brush now. Just being a bit more specific. If there's any of these shapes I don't like, I can just change them now. So now we come back to more of the rocky. I'm adding some silver into this. So these are kind of going to be slightly harder shapes. So instead of all the sort of bittiness I've done down here, this is like creating more sort of solid shapes. So I'm just going to come back in, clean a bit of space, and I want to have a bit of silver for sparkle and a bit of my lighter blue. I'm using my flat brush. Just a few little ripples in places, not all the way across. And if you don't have a flat brush like that, you can use just a small brush and just wiggle it a bit. Again, just trying to keep your brush strokes quite horizontal. And I'll come back and put some more of this over some of this here and hopefully send it underwater. Excuse me. So, the scary bit. Let's start with the smaller of the two trees here. So I'm going to use blue and brown again, but this time it'll be a bit more on the brown end of the scale. I'm actually going to put a little bit of gold into that as well. So I'm going to hold the brush by the tip, the opposite end to the bristles, put that down. And this is going to take 2 or 3 layers to make sure I cover, so you can come back in and just make sure it covers over those background colours. So this is my smaller tree, so I don't want to do too much on this. So now I've got kind of those basics in, I can come in and make some branches cross over. Then we're coming back to our medium brush, and we need a bit of greenery on this because this is a summer scene. So the lemon and the ultramarine are going to give me a nice soft green, and I'm going to dry brush again with this. I'll add a touch of gold into it as well because it sparkles. I'm not going too much over this side, I'll do a bit. But again, this is going to be covered over by the foreground tree, so I don't want it to be too fighting with it too much. And I'm just smudging a little bit where some of my branches are whilst they're still very soft. And that gives kind of breaks in those branches. So we are nearly there. So let's make up a brown again for the next tree. Just giving that a second. Okay, let's bring this one in. Let's bring this one in here. That's where that one's going to go. So what I think I need to do next is put the foliage in and then link it up with some branches. My original little sketch has very little information in it, so but I remember it being quite a dark sort of silhouette of a tree. So let's make up plenty of this. So again, ultramarine and lemon yellow are going to be my main colours, but I am going to add some brown into it as well, just to make it that bit sort of stronger in colour. I'm going to let those dry and I can come back in and work into it. But in the meantime, whilst I'm doing that, whilst I'm letting it dry off, I'll come back off with my blue-brown mix. And just come in with we can do a few extra twiggy bits. Okay, so let's come back to the greenery. It's going to be similar, but as that's dried back a little bit, we'll get a sort of another layer on there and it'll give it a different dimension. There's a few places where we could do with it. Coming back in with a smaller brush and creating some more broken marks in layers. Okay, so we just need, I think we need a little bit of shadow in that foreground. Well, there's not a huge amount of space for shadow with my light coming from over here, but I do seem to have stabbed something into the middle of the picture. Not worried it doesn't come completely out. I think we're just about there, but I kind of want to. I left a little gap down here for some grasses, didn't I? Okay, so I think it's time to do a reveal. There we go.